Hello, everyone, and welcome to Men Seeking Wisdom. This is a panel that has been put together to go over some aspects of the Bible that maybe people have not heard before. None of us are clergy, none of us are preachers. We're all just normal guys out there who all share a love of God and want to get His Word out there in the easiest manner possible. We come from all walks of life, and though we all live in different places, we all go to the same church. And that church is within my heart and everyone's heart because of the love of God and Jesus Christ. So let's just go ahead and introduce ourselves real briefly, and then we will get into what we're going to be studying today, and hopefully this will be an ongoing series that everyone can get behind and enjoy. So Russ, could you introduce yourself, please, to everybody?
Well, my name is Russ. I'm just honored to be a part of this panel. Appreciate you guys thinking of me when you put this together.
Matt?
So, hey guys, my name's Matt, and I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and these guys are really great friends of mine. I love Jesus, I love the gospel, and I love learning. And I don't know if anybody in the world can say they've got the market on knowledge. So I'm grateful to be able to be here and to learn with these guys, to seek wisdom together, and to be with you. So I'm excited about this.
Oh, me too, me too. Roger, if you would, please.
Yeah, obviously I'm Roger. Like David was saying, we may all be slightly different in how we look at our faith, but the central figure is Jesus, and our hope and our love and everything that we do sort of centers around trying to be Christ-like. And like Matt was saying, we're not Bible scholars. We have studied the Bible for a number of years, depending on who we are. But I am also, just hungry and seeking to learn more and be more Christ-like.
All right, great stuff, great stuff. My name is David. I'm a big time reader. I love to read into things, and sometimes maybe I overanalyze. So hopefully I won't bring that to the table here. But I don't know. I like to get things out to people if possible, be it entertainment or be it knowledge, and in this case, be it the Bible. And I think this is going to be a great panel to do this with. We all shared a common interest that brought us together originally, and then through that interest in YouTube, we found out that we all had a love for Christ as well, and we thought it was very important, especially in these trying times, to try to bring the word out there and to, if nothing else, just get some good, positive feelings out there, and maybe give someone who might be a little bit lost just a glimmer of direction, and not that the direction is coming from us, but the direction is coming from the book here, and anyone can find it. There's no shame on this panel. There is no judgment. Whatever your walk of life, whatever your belief system, we're not here to judge. There's no man here that has the ability to judge you. We're just going to impart what we see, the wisdom we see before us, and hopefully you get something out of it. So hopefully I didn't hijack that thread too much. But so today we got together and we were thinking about what book to read from first. And rather than just go chronologically, we decided to go with something that seems a little more applicable to current circumstances, and that's the book of Job. Job is a fascinating book, and a lot of times people who are not non-believers or even skeptics will point to stories like Job and saying, why does God punish good people? How could He let this come to pass? And Job is the telling of that story and the explanation of basically why it was allowed to happen. So it's a fascinating read, takes a lot of nuance, introspection, and I was glad you guys were with me to choose this story. Does this book hold a special meaning to any of you guys?
Yeah. Yeah. I've got a sister that is she's been ill most of her life, and she's my very own version of Job, and I have watched her get so sick that she's flatlined on the hospital bed, and I've seen her in her happiest moments when she was married and found out she was pregnant, and everything in between. And she's always been a stark example of this book. and a real life example of Job and the good and the bad. And so, every time I read this, I think of her, and I'll be sharing a lot of her story throughout these next couple episodes when we talk about Job and we go through the book. But I definitely love the learning in this book, and I'm definitely able to relate it to my own life.
I myself, and I have great shame that I never actually got to know this gentleman. When I was in high school, there was a man, he was, I think it was MS. He had MS, severe MS, and he was wheelchair bound completely. Almost think of like the Stephen Hawking chair. It was that bad. He couldn't even move his arms and all that. And he used to have religious passages on the back of his wheelchair. And a man who was born like that, who faced adversity his entire life and still had belief like that's telling. It's telling how powerful that the word can be, and it's a real inspiration. And that's one of my great disappointments in my life, that I didn't befriend that poor child. I say child, he was my same age, but I should have reached out to him, and in my own vanity, I didn't. But yeah, so that was kind of, he doesn't know me, I've never met him, but he was my inspiration kind of for wanting to read this book. And but I don't know if you guys had anything similar like that too. But yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through at least a chapter, possibly two, and we're going to read each verse aloud. And if the verse looks like it merits further discussion, because there's a lot of nuance in these verses, we're going to stop and we're going to toss around between the four of us and see what we come up with. Four different sets of eyes can maybe see the entire circle instead of just the very front. So, Roger, you being the elder, would you like to start us off with a few passages here?
Absolutely, it'd be my honor. So let's read in Job 1. I am reading from the King James Version. That was what we agreed to, as far as the version. And let's start in verse 1 here. Job 1:1. There was a man in the land of Uz, U-Z, whose name was Job. And that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. Do you want to talk a little bit there, or do you want me to continue?
Let's talk.
Yeah, I mean,
I was going to say, let's talk.
right off the bat, we are given a picture of the man, and it's already specific, and we find out later how great he is in the land and all that, but he feared God and eschewed all evil. So here's how we're going to start this passage off. We have basically the righteous man in the world. Matt, what were you going to say?
You know what? Eschewed means to actively avoid something, and so I love this idea that he actively avoided evil. And this being our very first episode with Men Seeking Wisdom, it's what we're trying to do. And this idea of us actively avoiding evil brings other questions to the table, which is, what is evil? And what do we need to avoid? And I think that's the purpose of what we're doing here. I think the way that you come to find evil is twofold. One, in us, there's this light. In all human beings, there's always a goodness in us. And my whole life, I've been able to, when you feel sick about something, you see something, it's just easily look at it and that's wrong. We got to listen to that gut feeling, our conscience, the spirit, whatever you want to call it. We've got to listen to it. And number two is, the more you study the gospel of Jesus Christ, the more your brain and your mind and your life is enlightened. The more you're able to see things for what they are. The more you're able to avoid evil. And so just here in this very first verse, I love thinking about Job being a person that probably studied the gospel a lot and probably listened to the spirit and his gut a lot. And it made him become this person that was called upright and perfect. And that's really why I wanted to be part of this panel, because I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything, but I'd love to learn more. And I'd love to be able to be the kind of person that someone looks at and says, Matt is upright and he eschews evil. And so I'm excited about this being the very first verse starting this show.
I find it fascinating that the Bible itself refers to the man was perfect and upright. When else in the Bible does it say a man is perfect? This shows how good Job really is in the Lord's eyes. And once again, very telling about the story that comes in the future.
I think that word perfect here means he was blameless and without sin. He was not somebody who engaged in behavior that was contrary to the will of God.
Yeah.
And Matt, there's no gospel yet here, but he did obviously know about the commandments and about the writings present at the time that were there, which of course we know are the basis of what a lot of laws and so forth. Like you were saying, evil, and generally speaking, selfishness is sort of the root of that evil. If you're doing something only for yourself, regardless of how it affects others, then you're starting to go down that path of evil, right? And that is very, very, shall we say, prevalent now, especially in these days where we're seeing, people take advantage of situations and hurting others. And when you said, like you said, you hit it around the nose there. He eschewed evil. He did everything he could to separate himself from what he knew would get him into trouble with the big guy upstairs.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Any thoughts you want to throw in there, Russ?
Well, going to where it says Job was that man was perfect and upright and one that feared God. I remember reading that the word perfect also meant mature in God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how it says how he feared God. I can't remember the exact verse where it is, but I remember reading that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Russ.
And just because he feared God and was perfect and mature in God, that showed that he had wisdom to avoid evil things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good point. Very good point. Very good point. Yeah, because you have to have that knowledge base before you, or like Matt was saying, that morality base, so that you know the difference between good and evil, right?
Yes.
So when we're just little sprouts, we're not too sure about, we do things that perhaps we feel good, or hedonistic things,
Mm-hmm.
but later on we find out that if those things hurt others, well, that's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of speaking to Russ's point, I didn't find the exact scripture you're thinking, but in Proverbs 16:6, it says, "By mercy and truth iniquity is purged, and by the fear of the Lord men depart from evil."
Yeah.
So because of the fear of God, you do have wisdom, and you do leave that behind. And for me, the more that you can leave evil behind, the less selfish you'll be and the less people you're going to harm. The more selfless you will be, and the more you'll be looking to love one another. So.
All right, Roger, if you want to continue.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we could keep going more.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Yeah, we only have about an hour here, guys, right? So, all right, here we go. 2. And there, King James again, right?
Yes.
"And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters." I think we can go a little bit past that one. "His substance was also 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 she-asses, and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all of the men of the East."
See, it's interesting here. A lot of people will think of richness as, being clad in gold and surrounded by jewels. But at the time, the beasts of burden were basically currency. So, the small farmer couldn't live without the ox. The traveling merchant couldn't live without horses or camels to pull the caravans in the wagons and that sort of thing. So if you look at how much livestock this man has here, it's pretty impressive. It's like a huge cattle rancher out in Texas nowadays, and most people didn't have that much. So it just goes to show how much this man really has in currency of the time.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And it's a lot. All right. And we also see here that he has 10 children. Big families were prevalent in the book, and he is no exception here. So 7 sons and 3 daughters. So he's got a lot of family. He's got a lot in his life right now. So we've already laid down that he is enriched in both substance being the riches of livestock, and also he's rich in family. He has a large family. We find out they're happy and healthy, and they get along. So unless there's anything you want to add to that, Roger, we can probably keep on moving.
Yeah, it also says that he has servants, so he was an employer as well. And he obviously, when you have so much livestock and animals like this, even 10 people would be tough to manage them. So he needed more than what he had in manpower to manage this. So he had servants as well, and that's key for later on.
Very true.
That is.
All right. For verse 4, and his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and to drink with them. So they had parties, essentially, or reunions, or I guess what we would call like get-togethers, right, or festivities. And they did eat and drink with them. Now that drink could be wine. Who knows, right? I don't think it gets that specific.
No, it doesn't.
And what's interesting here is that there's 7 sons, and each day they rotate to a different son's home.
Right.
And this gives me this idea that this family is very close, that they're together all the time, and that they really love each other deeply.
And they don't exclude anybody. They call the sisters, if it's brother A, then, hey, it's Monday. If it's brother C, it's Wednesday.
Yep.
We're all together.
This is also leads into a little more of the tragedy of the story, too, because we find out early on how very much the family means to both Job and the family means to each other. And we see that's fleeting. The happiness can be fleeting at times. So, yeah, it's an interesting setup here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Continue?
Yeah.
And it was so, when the days of their feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus did Job continually.
So I find that kind of interesting there, in the fact that maybe the children don't only know he's doing it, that he's offering up the burnt offerings and praying to God for the hearts and minds and souls of his children, because they may have sinned and cursed God in the hearts. And now Job doesn't know this, if he has, or if he does, it doesn't mention it here, but he does it anyway. And once again, it shows the care that the father has for the son. Here's a man who has everything. He has wealth, and he has a big family, all the important things of the time. And still, he gave his to God. And once we, as humans, we tend to, once we acquire things, we start to take them for granted, right? And maybe we start thanking ourselves a little too much for acquiring them. Job doesn't forget. Job doesn't forget where the goodness came from in his life. And regardless of what his children do, he still fears God, and he still gives praise where it is due.
Yeah. One thing that I think about here is everything in the law of Moses and burnt offerings, it symbolizes Jesus Christ and his atonement, his suffering, his resurrection, and the opportunity that he gives us because of his mercy and his blood and his death is the ability to repent. And so, Job is going off every day, pretty much repenting for his children, doing these offerings that make it possible for them to be forgiven for the things that they may or may not have done wrong. As a parent of 7, I know that I find myself often on my knees praying to God, asking him to forgive my children. I often find that I am praying for their welfare and doing everything that I can with God in heavens to protect and help my children. And even though repentance is a very personal thing, and we all have to do it for ourselves, as a parent, you also take that on and do it for those that you're in charge of, those that you love. And so it's interesting to see him as a father going and doing this daily for his children. and it always inspires me and reminds me I need to be that type of father for my posterity, for my family, for my children.
Nice. Yeah, totally agree. If you have children, it's a very special relationship from a father to your children, and the responsibility that we have. And this shows a couple things to me. And that one is that he gets it. He knows that just because he's prosperous does not mean that he can be lackadaisical in his faith.
Right.
You know that he's and two is that he doesn't leave things to chance. He does. This is almost like a preemptive strike here. He doesn't know if they sinned. You know, they might have gotten drunk and said a few things that were out of color, whatever, off color, whatever you may want to say.
Right.
He was like, you know what? I'm not chancing it. I'm still going to sacrifice to let God know that I'm thinking of them and I'm thinking of you. Out of respect for you, I want you to know that these are my offerings, whether it was a sheep or whether it was a dove, whatever it may have been. It's symbolic of his respect for God and his desire for his children to be protected, which is very important for what comes later on.
And Job seems like a very wise man as well, and he probably knows in his heart that since his kids came up probably without the hardship and toil that he had in making his fortune, and so basically they came up maybe in more of a life of ease than other people, it's very easy to get seduced to not appreciate those things and to take advantage of your power that you have about the land. So maybe he saw some glimmerings of that in his children's future. By the way, they maybe carried on and partied or whatever it is they were doing at the time. Doesn't really once again specify. So like you said, Roger, kind of a preemptive prayer just in case they start to go awry. Rusty.
I think it's human nature to take things for granted.
Oh yeah.
And it's something we see throughout the scriptures and throughout our own lives, and something we have to battle all the time. And he's battling it in his way, which is great.
Yeah, he's done so far. He's done everything, and that you can to be a man of God, to respect God, to pray, be there for your family, be there for your servants. He's done everything so far, like it says in the first one, perfectly, honestly.
And the other thing is, we don't even know if God's ever spoken to Job or, reached out to him in any way prior to this. But he's a good and upright man because his belief is true, and it's born of true faith. And that's also interesting, too, because a lot of times people in the Bible realize they've done wrong after God chastises them.
Yeah.
Or he reminds them of the path they need to be on. And as far as we know in this book, we don't know that Job has ever received any of that guidance, yet he continues to do these good things because they are right. Russ, did you have something to add? I'm sorry, I felt like I was cutting you off there.
Oh, no, that's good.
If you want, I'll go ahead and take over for a bit since you've started with our readings, because now it's maybe not. This is where it gets very difficult sometimes to comprehend, because we're talking about powers that created the heaven and earth here. So we have to try to put ourselves on the human mind of the Almighty. So it's not quite as easy, but we'll try to make some sense of it here a little more.
Before you get into it, I want to point out that verses 6 through 12 are actually a poetic style. It's a poem that was added in here. And so just want to throw that in there.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so verse 6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. So, okay, here we go. So everyone's included. And if God didn't want him there, he could have kept him. He could have barred his way. There's no way he could have come to this conclave without basically God's permission. So 7. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Pay special attention to this passage. We've talked about this before. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. So, okay, here we go, the wandering stranger. Anytime some people equate heaven on earth, and earth is the dominion that Satan walks. Heaven is above him. And I think a lot of people get confused by that. Basically, the earth is almost Satan's charge, and it's up to us to deny him at all times if possible. But he's among us. He's always with us. He's always there to tempt us. And even when God asks him what he's doing, he's just walking the earth. He's looking for things to do. He's looking for people to destroy. He's looking to turn people away from God at any possible moment. I think it's a very telling passage. What do you guys say?
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the old kind of adage, right? That Satan knows what his fate is. He knows he's lost. He just wants to bring it's ultimate sore loser, sour grapes here. He wants to bring everybody down with him. As many as he can. You remember what I was saying about evil?
Like a roaring lion seeking who he may devour.
Yeah.
I mean, misery loves company. The saying holds true, right? And who could be more miserable than Satan? So,
Yeah.
I think it's a really important passage to remember there. This is his domain, and it's up to us. It's up to us who are upon it to eschew him at all times. I'm going to use the same word here.
Yeah. Before you go on, a lot of people have a problem with that because, well, then why is he allowed to be in charge? And you have to start digging deeper here, and you have to ask yourself that question. You have to ask God that question. Why is Satan allowed to rule down here? And then that gets you to the point, well, what am I doing down here? What's the point of my life? And what's the point of that relationship with me and the adversary? Why is that happening? Why is that reason? I think we're going to get into it a little bit here. Mm-hmm. So I just want to put that out there as we keep going.
Nice teaser, Matt.
I mean, it's one of the great philosophical questions, why are we given unto the dominion of evil? And it's all I can say is that most of the stories in the Bible, you learn things through testing. And if a person is tested, the true measure of them comes out. And I've always thought of it as something of a testing ground. You know what I mean? If you can walk upright through the valley of the shadow of death, if you can walk upright through the land of sin and evil and do your best to come out unblemished and a believer, that's almost like a proving of worthiness for you to enter the kingdom of God. And it's very easy to, once again, I've said this before, to have strict faith when things are easy. So if we were all born into heaven, of course it'd be easy to believe. And if we had no travails that assaulted us, it would be easy to keep our faith. But it's through tribulation that we find the true measure of ourselves, I think. So,
and the big thing there too is there would be no growth. There's a purpose for trial, and that's growth.
Yeah, it's not about punishment. Not really about punishment here. A lot of people confuse that too. It's about enlightenment a lot of times, and this story is a great example of that. But let's go ahead and carry on a little bit. And this is, and hopefully I don't offend anyone here, I've always considered God here almost with a twinkle in his eye, maybe a wry smile on his lips, if he could be said to have such things. Because in verse 8, "And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil?" So it's almost like he's planting the seed into Satan's mind here, or he's just throwing down the gauntlet. Say, here is my ultimate ambassador on earth, the man who feareth me and who is righteous and upright and has plenty. What about it? Yeah. What can you do about this? Not to put too slovenly a point on it.
Let me interject a scripture if I can, guys. This is from Book of Mormon. It's Mosiah 23:6, chapter 6, verse 21 and 22. But it speaks perfectly to this. It says, "Nevertheless, the Lord seeth fit to chasteneth his people, yea, he trieth their patience and their faith. Nevertheless, whosoever putteth his trust in him, the same shall be lifted up at the last day." And I think what's happening here is the Lord's going to try Job and his patience and his faith. And if Job passes the test, he will be lifted up at the last day. And so I'm excited to see now after the Lord's like, have you thought about Job? What Satan's going to say here, because you kind of touched on it a second ago.
Yeah, it's almost like a role reversal here. It's like God tempting Satan here. Or as I call it, it's God setting the trap for Satan, because the
Yeah.
greater glory is going to come out of this. You know that. Even before I read the whole thing, I thought to myself, Satan is falling into a trap here somehow, some way. And this, again, we could go so many different ways, but to me, Satan and God here are almost like the setup men. It's really us and our relationships amongst each other that he's really telling us about.
Yes.
But I'm not going to get too ahead of that, because you know me, I get ahead of myself, so I will control myself.
All right, unless we have anything else, I'll go ahead and keep moving on. Verse 9, now we're going to let Satan take over here, metaphorically speaking, of course. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Doth Job fear God for naught?" So, once again, Satan seems bewildered here. And you can tell it's not working in his brain what God is doing here. He can't see the future like the Lord can. And basically, and this goes again to the failing of Satan. Does Job fear God for naught? Does Job only fear God for the reward? Because he's prosperous. So, just once again, very telling, because his mind is just not how it works. His mind does not work for the good of people. His mind does not believe in the good of people, even. Because it said it right there, because he thinks that Job himself is only, at least that's how I read it, that Job only fears God because he has so much.
Yeah. Well, I see the adversary here saying, does he fear you for naught? In other words, like, you've never done anything bad to him. Why would he be scared of you? But one thing I do want to point out here, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, David, is I think this is and Roger too, I think this is a metaphor for us to look at ourselves and the relationship that we had, like you said, Roger. I don't think in any way and in any form can Satan hold any weight compared to God and ever try to bargain with God. It doesn't work that way. God is God, and there is no power, no knowledge, nothing that he doesn't control. But I think that it points out to us is that the adversary is miserable, like we've said, and his desire is to trick us so that he can make us miserable. And so this question that he's asking God probably isn't really posed to God, because it seems like he's trying to tempt God here. Oh, is he does he love you because you've never done anything to him? God's not going to be tempted by Satan. But what it is for us thinking, do we love God for naught? And then Satan's going to go into in the next verse exactly what he means. So I wanted to point that out.
Yep.
Yeah, good point.
And in verse 10, Satan goes on, "Hast not thou made a hedge about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land." Basically just kind of reiterating what we're talking about. Job is well off, and it seems to Satan that maybe everything he has is because of God's protection. And so basically it's Satan saying, well, how could I tempt this guy, or how could I hurt him and do what you ask of me, because he has the blessing of your hand at all times, so he's invulnerable to me. In verse 11, this is when he puts the question to him now. "But put forth thy hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face." So this is saying that Job's fearing of God is only superficial. It is only as long as he is well off, he's in health, he has a big family, he has riches of animals and land. Basically, once again, this is the way Satan's mind works. The only reason that anyone can love anything is for what it does for them. You know what I mean? That's how I read that. How about you guys?
Yeah, but he's essentially saying his faith is two-dimensional. It's only as good as what's behind it.
Yeah.
So that's really not faith. What he's saying is that he doesn't have faith. He just has your provision and your protection. So he's of course going to praise you, because that's what his thought processes are.
Because he's got it easy.
Yeah, he's got it all. He's got it all. Like you were saying, David, before, like, why is Satan here? This is why, right here, right? Because how do we know if we have faith, if we haven't put it to the test, right? You can say you believe, but if circumstances go against you, then do you still believe?
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
I think that's life's test. You know, it's one of the many tests. When things are going easy, it's easy to be nice. You know, it's easy to praise God and do the things He asks. When you have friends and they're treating you good, it's easy to treat them good. You know, but when those things change, that's when the real test comes, and that's when you really prove who you are to God and to your fellow man, to your family, to yourself. And so it's a journey in life that we all fail in sometimes, and we all pass with flying colors sometimes. But one thing that I like, that I love, that I was taught when I was young is faith and self-control are muscles. And the more you exercise those muscles, the stronger that they get. As a father, if I were to give in to my rage every time milk was spilt or something was broken, I would become more full of rage. But every time I tried to not give in to that, every time I try one more time to be a little kinder and a little nicer and a little more understanding, the easier it gets, the better I get at it. And I think that's the same way with faith. The more that you are able to say the words at the end of this chapter, and we'll get there, the more that you're able to say, you know, God's in charge, and no matter what's happening, I love Him. And I know He is perfect, and whatever He's doing in my life is perfect for me. The more you're able to say that, and the more you practice that, the more you're able to live that way and believe it. And the more it becomes part of you and true. So,
Russ, did you have something to toss in there?
No.
Okay. It's not completely pertinent to but this reminds me of a story that actually involved me. I was in Egypt doing some work, and I was with my interpreter, and we were driving to a place to put the equipment in, and he was talking on a cell phone. Well, apparently that's illegal there. There's a lot of policemen there. There's big roundabouts there where all the traffic goes, you know, and they get off on their little exits or whatever. And there's usually a policeman in the center areas of those and waving traffic around or whatever. And he was talking on the cell phone, and the policeman waved him down, made him pull over. And then some words were exchanged, and then money changed hands, like $40 or whatever it was, and he handed it out to him. And I'm like, well, what was that all about? And he said, well, it's illegal to talk on the cell phone here, so I just gave him, $20 or whatever it was, and he let me go. And I said, that seems a little corrupt, doesn't it? He told me something that's always stuck with me, and he said, it's hard to be proud and just when you're hungry. So I think this is something here that Satan expects out of everybody. If times get tough, you will turn your face from God and curse him to his face, just like he says right here. And once again, that's how little credence he gives humanity. He thinks we're all that weak in spirit, and some people are tested and they don't come out well. So those are the people he's rooting for, and he wants to turn everyone into that, I think.
yeah.
And for the last verse of Satan's little passage here, I hate even saying that, and the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. So this is God turning the dogs loose on Job. Job is now public enemy number 1, and he has no protections from Satan's advances and cruelty. So this is where the story really takes a turn. 12 verses in, and Job's in big trouble now, and he doesn't even know it yet.
And he hasn't done anything to deserve it. Let's make that clear, right?
Yep.
And he's not, and Satan isn't allowed to personally do anything to him. So can't kill him or
Harm his body.
Curse him, but anything else is fair game.
Yeah. Something I want to point out here that's probably my favorite message in all of Job. Well, there's a ton of those, but it's one of the best ones. Is that this idea that the adversary, Satan, the devil, has to have permission before he comes and tempts us. It goes along with that saying, we'll never be tempted more than we can handle. Mm-hmm. If God, in his perfect wisdom, is allowing the adversary to do this to Job, it shows the amount of confidence that God has in his children. It shows the amount of confidence that God has in me. And that's very makes me feel very emotional that God's in the heavens. And when I'm going through a hard time, he's like, I allowed it, son, because you can beat it, because you can make it through this, because you're greater than this. Remember me and everything will be okay. Every time I go through hard things in life, death, loss, pain, suffering, I try to think this way. And I try to remember that God has a plan, that he's perfect and he would never do anything to hurt me. And that at the end of every plan and everything I'm going through, he's waiting there for me. And that gives me so much power and so much hope when things are hopeless and full of despair. So I love that message in this verse here.
I'll kind of segue onto that a little bit too. Is, this may not be popular sentiment, but no good father is completely easy on his sons, right? Sons, daughters, whatever, but especially sons. If they sit around laying on that couch all day and just play video games, you never get on them, you never give them direction, you never push them. I don't think you're doing your job as a father. And
Nope.
It's very easy to see almost like an allegory to that here. Here's a man who's had it good his entire life, but maybe he's never really been pushed. Maybe he's never really been put to the test. And I think that any of those out there who have been in a similar situation with a child or loved one, whether sometimes it's good to push them. And maybe this is another reminder of that in this book here. It's once again him steering us toward the place we need to be. So I don't know what you guys thought about that, but
Yeah, and that makes sense, especially later on when we learn that what you go through does not necessarily define your faith.
Right.
Okay? And I don't want to get ahead of myself. Let's leave it at that. But you're right, David. I think that if we just let things slide, just because we love somebody, that's not love. That's lackadaisical. That's taking the easy way out.
Right.
It's the hard thing is to do the right thing when you know that you're going to get gruff for it. That's the tough thing.
Yep.
even if they don't know what's best for them, But
tough love. You've heard that term before, right?
Yep.
Tough love.
More pain now prevents an overflow of pain later.
Yeah.
preventative, and it's so important. All right, so we can stop talking about Satan talking to God now. We don't need to talk about Satan anymore if we can, but unfortunately he does play a role here in the coming passages. So in verse 13, and there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. In 14, and there came a messenger unto Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the asses feeding beside them. In 15, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I am only escaped alone to tell thee. So here is the first boom to fall, as it will. This is the first marble knocked out of the ring. Okay, so we talked about why Job was rich in wealth. He was rich because he had lots of animals and probably land. And, okay, that's gone. And the people who tended those animals are gone now. So that's just the first part of his wealth and riches that are all of a sudden gone in the space of a day.
Yeah.
And it's telling too, because this could happen in our lives. It's not with livestock, and it could be anything. We can lose our house, we lose our job. A family member dies in a fire, something like that is always applicable in our lives as well. So it's very good to remember that just because a man is rich and he loses a ton doesn't mean it could happen to a man who's poor as well. The man who's poor could lose his food for the evening. The man who's poor, could lose the use of his limbs, whatever the case may be. Something bad could always happen. Let's see, 15, 16, verse 16. While he was yet speaking, there came also another, and it rains, it pours, and said, the fire of God is fallen from heaven, and hath burned up the sheep and the servants, and consumed them. I am only escaped alone to tell thee. So, before, some of the livestock were killed by marauders, right? Bands of men came by and slew his agents, right? Well, now not only is the powers of man against Job, now it looks like the powers of God are against Job, because this fire comes from the sky and destroys what's left of his ability to make a living, right? And kills the rest of his livestock and the servants. So he's getting it from all fronts now. It's just getting faster and faster. 17, he's not done yet either. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, the Chaldeans made out 3 bands, and fell upon the camels, and have carried them away. Yea, and slain the servants with the edge of the sword. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. And that's not done yet either. Verse 18, while he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. So this does not set up good things, right? That's where that verse ends, but we see how the other verses ended, with death and destruction. Now it's easy to replace things. Now we're talking about the man's family, which obviously he loved. Verse 19, and behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness, and smote the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. So remember how it said earlier on that all the children were gathered in the house to eat and drink and celebrate as they were wont to do. The house has fallen in, and it's funny that it's a great wind from the wilderness, which kind of comes into play later as well. So once again, this is something that is an act of God. This is something obviously that's sent by greater powers. This is not just the hand of man doing it. So this man has just lost his entire family. All of his children are gone. Wow. It's difficult to grasp because it doesn't mean as much as reading it on the page. But if you have family, loved ones, anyone that you care about, imagine that, one, all your livelihood is stripped away. Your house is burned. Your car is destroyed. Whatever, all those little things that we think are important. All that hits you, and then at the same time, you lose your entire family. It really puts it in perspective if you can try to empathize with the situation there. And can a worse fate befall any man? I can't think of one.
Totally reversal of fortune from essentially a man who had everything now to a man who essentially has lost everything. He still has his wife, but everything else is gone.
Yep.
So it's awful. I'm sure a lot of people don't find their children as precious as he does. But once again, it definitely went to show how much he loved his children, because he prayed for them daily. He made offerings for them daily, whether they knew it or not. That's how much that this man loved his children. So it's really easy here, because it doesn't really go too much into Job's sorrow here initially. But it's just really try to put your mind into this poor man. He's lost everything. He's had this charmed existence, big loving family, and it's all gone in an instant. And that's something to keep in mind for all of us, because it could happen to anybody. He was God's favorite at the time. So, verse 20, then Job arose and rent his mantle, and shaved his head, and fell down upon the ground and worshipped. Job fears God. Job loves God. What did he do? He doesn't cry out. He does cry out when renting mantles, when you kind of petition the gods a little bit, but he bows down to worship. He doesn't cry and he doesn't complain. And we'll see more of this in the next verse here. But I think that's very telling of the man too.
Yeah.
Because I think any of us would be tempted to start blaming God originally, right here at this moment, and saying, "Why have you done this to me?" And that's not how this reads. What do you guys say on that?
Yeah, he was in mourning, obviously, here. The rent of the clothes and the shaven head, symbolic of how deeply he felt the loss. But, like you said, not complaining, per se. But it was a way of him to deal with it, expressing his loss, his mourning. Obviously, when you lose 10 children in an instant, we're not automatons, we're not robots. We have feelings, and even though our faith may be there, we still have an emotional response to a loss that great. Yeah. And that's what he was going through.
Yeah.
And I think something else is telling too about this is, as I was saying earlier, the fireball, the windstorm, these are all acts of God that have destroyed his family or his means of survival out there. So who's the first person you normally would blame for such a thing, right? That's not what he does here. Even if it was God that laid that upon him, he still fell down on his knees and worshipped God. This is how much of a God-fearing man it was, and how pure he really was. Let's get into verse 21 here. Oh, I'm sorry, Matt. Do you have something?
Yeah, a thought that came into my mind, because we all go through hard times, and there are definitely things that we're going to go through in this life that we have or will, where you're going to wonder. Our relationship with God, I think, is a threefold thing. Most people start with they do things out of fear, and this could be a relationship with anyone. I have fear to break the commandments and get in trouble. I have fear to that God can do something bad to me, and then your faith grows, your relationship with God grows, and it goes to the next step, which is a little higher than doing something out of fear, and that's duty. I've got a duty. I believe in God. I'm a Christian. I have made covenants with God where I need to uphold those, and it's my duty to do those things. And I think even above duty would be love. When you come to love God with all of your heart, you do things out of love. And there's many scriptures within, many verses within the scriptures where it tells us what true love is, And depending on where you're at in that relationship with God is kind of going to depend on the way that you react sometimes. And for me here, I honestly believe Job loves God. I believe that his reaction here is somebody that would kneel down and say, "My God, help me. I just lost everything. I just lost my children, and you are the only thing that can comfort me and get me through this at this moment." And of course, like we've read, we're going to be tested, and that faith, that love is always going to be tested, and we're always going to have to prove it. But I think here Job is showing he truly loves God. So,
I agree.
And he carries on with this in the next verses. I'll kind of put them together. Verse 21, and said, or this is Job still speaking, "Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." And in 22, "In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly." So, getting right back to what we were saying, he's lost everything, and yet his faith remains, and yet he remains a loyal servant of God. And man, how many of us have ever been tested like this? And the funny thing is, this is the day, or it seems to be the day that this all happened. So that's when your grief is at your highest, and when you might be irrational, not thinking clearly, and be wanting to blame somebody. And he doesn't do it here. He doesn't do it here. So Satan has his work cut out for him.
Yeah, he has incredible perspective when you think about it. Like you're saying, David. He worshiped God. Obviously, he loved God, like Matt said. This had to be an incredible man to be able to do this, because how many amongst us would be, so ingrained in our faith at this moment, right? I mean, it's beyond my comprehension how incredible. Obviously we don't know all the specifics, but it sure seems like he had a perspective. He said, "Look, I came in with nothing. I'm going to go out with nothing anyway." Okay, and anything I did have was provided to me by God. So when you consider that kind of mindset, that he took a logical inventory of what he had, and knew that was where it came from. And obviously he's not saying, well, why don't I have what I had? He was like, I'm happy that I'm glad that I had what I did have, and I know that eventually I'm not going to have it anyway. So again, you're right. This is really, like, there is like none like this, like Job at this point. At least in my mindset, very few of us, or none of us, would react so penitently, even though he didn't do anything to deserve it.
Yeah.
If I could say something, to me that just it speaks volumes After all that, in such a short amount of time, all that loss, he still didn't sin. And he dropped to his knees and prayed.
Yeah.
Now, I've had some things happen to me in my life. Obviously, absolutely nothing compared to what Job went through. I consider what happened to me small things, depression, heartbreak, things of that nature. But those little things, I'm going to be honest, they made me give up and walk away for a long time. And it was God bringing this very book back into my mind that brought me back.
I think this very first chapter is a great example for all of us, too, because this is also God reminding us maybe that our imagined slights aren't quite as big as we're making them out to be. Maybe we lost a job. Yes, that's bad. Maybe we lost a family pet. Maybe, the car was wrecked. Whatever happened. We might think it's the worst thing in the world at this time, but here's the example he put before us. It's not the worst thing that could ever happen to you. My favorites have been tested much harder than this. So it also might be a good chapter to give people perspective of what they think has gone wrong in their life. And not to say that anyone's small pains are bad. Pain is bad regardless. But I'm just saying this is a great way to put things in perspective. It could be so much worse most of the time. And that's what this book is kind of about.
The thing I love about the scriptures is that they speak to us in layers, multiple messages at one time. For somebody reading this, they may say, you know what, I'm going through a hard thing, but it's not as bad as Job. I can get through it, right? And it gives them this hope and this belief in themselves and this perspective, like you say. For someone like Russ, who's in the middle of going through something that is maybe comparably small to what Job went through, but to God, if you're God's son, nothing is small. Nothing is unimportant to him. He loves you, and he knows everything you're going through, whether it's heartbreak or loss of 10 children and everything in between. He loves you and he's there for you. And to me, that is an amazing message, because whoever's reading this, the Lord doesn't want them to look at it and say, well, I'm not important. The Lord wants you to look at it and say, the reason I'm writing this book is so that you could read it in this moment and know you're important. You can know you're my child and I love you and I'm here for you. And if Job can get through this, you can get through it. I believe in you. And that hope of the scriptures and reading this fills me with hope, no matter what I'm going through or will go through. So,
and I think what Russ was saying is pertinent, because it's really not the scale of what you're going through is really not the issue. It's your reaction to that, to what occurs, that is the lesson here, right? Because remember the parable of the man who had his debt forgiven, but that didn't forgive the debt that he had.
Yep.
Right. I mean, he didn't learn his lesson, know. But Russ, you did, and that, I think, is what God is telling us here.
Yeah.
That just because we go through these things, it doesn't mean he doesn't love you. It doesn't mean that you did anything wrong.
Yeah.
But he does want to see what we're made of, right?
Exactly.
Who it is that we, are we two-dimensional faith people, or when things go bad, are we still going to rely upon him? And that's what you did. And that's I think one of the, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but I think that's ultimately going to be where we're going to be landing. Yeah. It's about us and our reactions, our the way that we react or respond, actually more accurately, to the issues that confront us. Yeah. Some of us respond weakly or ineptly, and other of us respond through our faith and through what we know is the truth. And that is the difference, a big difference, in not what happens to us, but ultimately where we end up.
Yeah. Man, I am loving this. Did you all want to do chapter 2? Do you all think you have it in you to do chapter 2, or did you want to start closing up here? I'm all game for chapter 2, but I don't know if anyone has any other.
I think we're about an hour in already, so
Let's close up with a couple of closing thoughts, and then we'll get to chapter 2 next episode.
yeah. Let's try to keep this to a more manageable bite, because there's a lot here to digest.
Yeah, very true.
One chapter, 1 hour. It's not bad. It's a pretty important setup chapter.
Yeah, it's pretty important. Yeah.
It is.
It's the roller coaster of a lifetime. Like I said, once again, you have the man up on high, and now he's the man upon low. So, thoughts, discussion here.
There's
Go ahead.
No, you, Russ. Go first, man.
It just speaks to how quickly something could change in your life. It's like Roger said, how you react to it. There's different levels of brokenness that you could go through, and Job, his was to the extreme and beyond. To go from having everything to losing it all. Children, his livelihood, how he made a living, everything just done. And to still not turn away from God. That just, like I said earlier, it speaks volumes of who Job was.
Yeah, it almost gives us an example of who we should strive to be. Not that we should strive to be like any man, but I mean, it just gives us the example to follow. Just be strong in your faith through good or ill. And that's I think that's almost like the overlying theme of this entire book, And it's great to have the example put in front of us. And just once again, it's very simple to say, well, this book is about letting bad things happen to good people. It is, but it's also a story of redemption. It's a story of the dominance that God has over Satan. And if you think about it, because we'll talk about the end, of course, later on, but he knows he's going to win this, and Satan is helpless to do it. He plays his part here like a puppet. He probably thinks he's reveling in a good time of hurting Job, of tormenting Job, and trying to turn his face away from God, and he's beaten. And once again, if God can pretend to laugh at somebody, he's probably laughing inside at Satan here, at him struggling to try to break this man. And it gives a little bit of hope too. Because to know that as powerful as Satan is in the everyday life of people upon the earth, there's a much higher power than him out there. And if you just put your faith in that can see you through the travailing times.
Amen. Amen.
My favorite thing about reading the scriptures from the Old Testament to the New Testament, the Book of Mormon, and everything else that's available is the purpose of it all, and it's Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is in the Old Testament, he's in the New Testament, he's in the Book of Mormon, everything that I read and love. And all of us are going to fall short of reacting the way Job did here. We have or we will. Whether it's in a huge thing that happens in our lives and we're like, I can't believe you did this to me, how could you do this to me? Or if it's in the small things. I mean, you're not praying every day, you're not preparing yourself by reading your scriptures daily, you're not reacting the way that you should when your wife or your friends speak to you. We're all going to fail somewhere. And the fact that this scripture exists makes me feel that there's hope and that it's okay if I fail sometimes, as long as I get up, dust myself off, and try again. And that's the purpose that Christ was given to us for, because we would all fail, we would all make mistakes, we would all fall short, and Jesus Christ paid that difference so I can say I'm sorry and I can try again. And I want people, after reading this and hearing this, to realize no matter if you failed and you've completely blamed God for things that have happened in your life, he knew that. Jesus Christ, when he went into the Garden of Gethsemane and bled from every pore and suffered for our sins, our pains, our afflictions, our sorrows, he knew that you would do that, and he happily suffered for it. And all you have to do is realize, hey, I maybe didn't act the way I should have, but Christ paid that price. And so let me take that free gift, that gift that's been given freely to me, but it wasn't free. Let me take that gift and use it. And so that's the message I get, is that whether I've been like Job sometimes, and I have, and whether I've been opposite of Job sometimes, and I have, Christ makes it possible for me to move forward. and I love him for that, and I always will love him for that.
Amen on that.
I've been mostly opposite Job, if I'm to be truthful, right? But I sometimes when I read this, it reads like a Greek tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you know anything about that, it's set up just that way. It's those extremes, like Russ was saying. He just went from essentially the man to utter misery. And sometimes, what you read this, and if you read this on just a basis of no faith, you're saying, God is just being cruel here. He's just being darn right, just terrible.
Yeah.
But guys, there's a reason for it, and more than that, in Job, it sort of says we don't know everything. We don't have the capacity, perhaps, or at this point, the knowledge base to see why this is being here. But this is for our benefit. I think what Matt was saying there is that we are to learn from it. And if there's a foreshadowing of Jesus coming up here later on, which is important. But again, this is only chapter 1, and we've rambled on for a while. But I'll just end with this. Job teaches us how to be. Okay, he prayed, he believes, he's long-suffering, he's a good father, a husband, a provider. All these things are lessons for us to learn.
Yes.
That was not what caused this tragedy. In fact, it did in a sense because he was so good at it. But it was a result of anything that he did. Okay, it's now going to be clear to us that there is an end game here that we are not privy to at this point. And when that happens, God will be glorified, and Job will end up even better than before.
Yeah, I find the story of Job very pertinent to my own life. In reverse, though, for all my life I've been blessed. I didn't even know it. I turned my face from God for a long time. I actively denied him, and nothing bad ever happened to me. I didn't have a sickness of mine cured. I didn't have a family member saved. I didn't have riches thrown upon me, nothing or taken from me. I've always been comfortable. I usually don't go to bed hungry. I have a loving family. I have friends. I generally have a positive outlook on life, and still I denied him. And it's so hard to explain, but I found that I could come back into God's arms so easily. And if I just opened my eyes, I was as rich as Job was. It may not have been in a bank account, but I was rich in spirit. I was rich in love and family, and I just didn't see it. And for some reason, I had this active need to deny it. So I skipped right past Job being upright and fearful of God, and I was into the doldrums of Job, when really I was blessed all along, and I should have seen it much earlier than I did. And it's another great regret of my life, is it took me as long as it did to come and see what I've been blessed with all along. And I just find it so interesting. I've told you guys before about my theory of the little nudges. It's so easy to get so caught up in your life and not see all that you have. I know there's bad times for everybody, and I've had bad times too, but nothing compared to most other people, But it's just so easy to not see the forest for the trees, and to take what you have for granted. And all that is so fleeting, and it can just leave you in a moment's time. And I don't know, but I just find Job so analogous to my life in reverse, because I started off really well, and I've been really well ever since. And it's like, if God could be said to have afterthoughts, it's him tapping me on the shoulder. Where he was basically telling Satan what to do here. He was trying to tell me what to do, and I just wasn't listening. And all you have to do is open your ears and put your fanny in check for just a little while, and it's amazing how fast love and knowledge can flow in. So that's enough for my proselytizing there. But I think we'll go ahead and start wrapping up here. we are Men Seeking Wisdom. We are just, once again, a panel of 4 guys get together to read through the good book here, and try to not give wisdom to others, but to ourselves first. And if you can gather wisdom from your own readings, that's the goal of everything there. The enrichment of the spirit, the enrichment of the mind and ourselves, and hopefully what we say here is maybe helping others to understand some of the passages there. Sometimes it's a little hard to read, sometimes it's a little hard to understand, so hopefully our dissection and really bearing down into specifics of it can help somebody. I myself just love hearing different perspectives from everybody else and what the same words mean to them. There'll be more of this here in the near future. We're going to go through the entire book of Job here for long, so we'll probably do it in a 4-part series. If you have anything you want to add to it, please feel free to do so down in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you guys. Closing statements. Anything to say before I go ahead and give us our closing passage?
I would say read along with us. Put it in the comments below. Message us. You can find us on Instagram, Men Seeking Wisdom. And you want to be a part of this, let us know. Bring your family, your friends. We just want to come together and love each other, and especially celebrate Christ and his doctrine and his gospel and his words. So what a time. This is wonderful. I'm grateful for you gentlemen that you're my friends and that we can have this conversation, and love you bunches.
Amen to that.
Amen. I echo that. And yeah, if you want to read ahead and share your thoughts below in the comments and your perspectives, I think we'd love to hear that, because again, we are seeking wisdom. We're not at the point of hubris to say that we have it. Okay? We are seeking it. And like I said, we have different perspectives. We have perhaps slightly different ways that we look at our Christianity and our faiths. So, but we're trying to find commonalities, and I think Jesus and that is the central thing that binds us together. Yeah. And everything else will work out as we go along. So it's been a pleasure, guys. It's been an honor. My spirit has been uplifted, and I've learned, and I want even more to seek Him, because I know that there's so much more out there for me to find, that I want to seek more. So thank you for inviting me in this August quartet here, and hopefully going forward we will deep dive and find more treasure hidden underneath the word here.
It's got a chill, man. Think about all that. It really is something, man, and I really can't wait till the next shows. Russ, thanks for joining us today as well. Any closing thoughts from you for I read our final passage?
Well, it's like Roger said. Feel free to read along with us and even read ahead and leave comments, questions. There's share your own thoughts. There's so much wisdom in this book, and I guarantee, I don't know, but maybe just a tiny little bit of it. So if you have thoughts, questions, or just want to add to the conversation, feel free to leave the comments.
Amen to that. There is something in this book for everybody. Do not think, just because you're not, every Sunday and every Wednesday churchgoer, that you cannot read this book for yourself and try to understand what it's trying to tell you. This book is for everybody, and there's almost no situation you can think of that's not covered inside. There is something that will relate to your life somewhere in this book. So we definitely highly encourage you to go read through it yourself, read along with us, and please join us in the future. Maybe we'll do live streams in the future. We'll see about all that. But yeah, definitely leave a comment. Let us know your experience with it, especially with the first chapter of Job. I mean, did you get any of the similar feelings or thoughts out of there? And if it was different, we'd love to hear about it. So let's go ahead and close out here with 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. I think it's very telling in the world we live in right now. And it's just, God will always hear you. So just keep His face forth in your mind, and you'll be amazed what you can hear. So thank you again so much, everybody, for joining me. To my great brothers are here on the panel. I look forward to doing the next show. And we'll actually have links to as well to any other social media that we have down below. So once again, like, comment, subscribe, and we'll be back in the future for Chapter 2. So thank you again, and until next time, this is Men Seeking Wisdom.